Hi everybody, my name is Phil and I am a recovering codependent from Ireland. It's lovely to be here. Thank you to all of the organisers and to Mauricio for being secretary this evening and for everybody who's after doing readings and service so far. It's really, really lovely to be here. It is 8 o'clock. Well, it is now almost 20 past 8 in the evening in Ireland. So that's why it looks like I'm sitting in the dark. I am. It is night time here. So it is at the end of a long day for me, busy day. But this is absolutely the greatest way that I could spend a Saturday evening, actually. And I'm so delighted that I was asked to be here. When I was asked, it was to be around step 12, as it is the 12th month of the year. So if it's okay, what I'm going to do is just, if anybody has the blue book, the blue CoDA book, I'd like to say welcome to the newcomers to the meeting, anybody who's returning, anybody who's here for the first time, people who have gone through the steps, people who haven't. But if you do have the book, step 12 is on page 76. So I just think it's important to maybe read it out first, and then I will share my experience, strength and hope of doing step 12, and then also being a vehicle of step 12 for other people through sponsoring work. So step 12 is, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to other codependents and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And then they break it down into 3 parts, which I think is really important. So if it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and do that. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, the first words of these steps were often glossed over in our eagerness to carry the message. Upon reflection, however, we could see that these words described the very foundation of our recovery. We came to understand that as a result of putting the 12 steps to work in our lives, we were transformed, and that no matter what we believed about ourselves, as long as we put these steps into action, the result would be our spiritual awakening. The second part, we tried to carry this message to other codependents. By living this program one day at a time, we became the message we had hoped to carry. We shared our experience, strength and hope with other codependents at CoDA meetings or when asked. It was our process, what we did rather than our personality, that was the message. The way we carried it was by being where we could share it with other people. And the last part, and practice these principles in all our affairs. The final phrase in this step reminded us that we could not separate our spirituality from the rest of our lives. The principles embodied in the 12 steps and the 12 traditions were not the private domain of CoDA meeting rooms. They were meant to be practiced in all our affairs. I suppose there's a piece that I have in that step, and it just fell out earlier on, and you know, it's around the higher power. It's a higher power metaphor. It's something I heard a long, long time ago in a CoDA room, and it just struck me. And what it says was, I can't see the wind, but I can see what it's doing to the trees. And I suppose that's the higher power working in my life. I can't see it, I can't touch it, but I can see what it's doing for me, and I can see what it's doing for other people. And since I have taken step 12, and since I have become a sponsor, I have seen that happen in other people's lives. I can see the wind in their life. I can see the changes. I can see the spiritual awakening. But first, to speak to my own and how that happened for me, I suppose, very quick background. I suppose when I came into recovery first, I came in through a substance abuse, and I went into treatment, and that was 4 years ago now. But 20 years ago, I had an ending of a relationship, and at the end of that, I had a lot of grief that had happened in my life up to that time that was repressed and unexpressed and never dealt with, never managed, never spoken about, never expressed. So I used different methods. I used, you know, people, and I used substances, and I used whatever I used. It doesn't matter. But I ran away from those feelings. I didn't know how to cope with them, and it was never modeled to me how to cope with them. And it was a lot of grief and a lot of loss, actually. So when that relationship ended, it was like all of those griefs and losses came at the one time, and I was completely overwhelmed by them, completely. And I felt so alone, so left by myself, and that I could not cope with another loss. I couldn't cope with another loss in my lifetime, and I attempted suicide. And after that attempt, thankfully, didn't work, because I'm here today to tell that tale. I'm proudly here today to talk about that, not shameful of it anymore. But when I went to a counsellor after that, it was the first time I heard the word codependent. You know, it's the very first time, but I didn't understand it. I was in emotional turmoil at the time and I couldn't hear it. But I also heard the word co. The relationship was over, so surely it didn't really matter anymore. Surely that wasn't going to be a part of my life because that relationship was gone. So it's not something I really needed to focus on. And then we fast forward, 16 years later, and I'm sitting in a treatment centre with no wallet of my own, with no home, with no job, with no money, with no car, with no house, with no relationship because it had ended. And I realised in that moment just how codependent I was, just everything was gone, everything, because it was all left with that other person. And I suppose I did sit there kind of wondering, well, where is God in all of this? What the hell? Like, here we go again. I'm by myself, and the self-pity was there. There's no doubt the self-pity was there, and loss and grief again. And I had thought I was so smart because I had used all my protective mechanisms in codependencies to control, to avoid, to barrier up myself, and yet still seem connected. I had used all these wonderful methods to keep myself safe. And yet here I am sitting in this treatment centre, realising that everything is gone and I'm left with nothing. And I was angry with God. I was angry with the God of my understanding at the time. And I didn't really see a way out, but I also knew that from my failed attempt at suicide, I didn't have the courage to try that again, actually. And I had seen my family be very, very upset after that piece, and I knew I couldn't do that to them. I necessarily didn't want to be alive, but I just couldn't for my family. I couldn't put them through it. I had also disconnected from my mother at this point. I had completely emotionally detached from her 4 years previous to this. And the reason I had detached from her was that I absolutely wanted her to love me, and I felt that she didn't. Again, codependency played a part. I perceived things, I didn't think about the struggles that she had, with me growing up as a child. When my dad died when I was very, very young, she was left to kind of hold the can and to look after 7 children. And she worked, she put food on the table, she made sure I never went without. And all of that was her expressions of love. But because she didn't bounce me up on her knee and hug me and physically attune to me or attach to me, I read that as rejection. So as the years went on, more and more of that stuff came about, and I was very angry with her and I was bitter, but I couldn't tell her. I couldn't say, I really want you to love me, because I was terrified that she'd tell me she didn't. Even though I felt it, I couldn't handle the rejection again. So I suppose from my suicide attempt at 21 onwards, that fear of being left alone, that fear of being rejected was the absolute thing that drove me in my life. And I suppose I came up with methods to ensure that that wouldn't happen. Now, either I left very quickly before somebody could put me out, or I became all-consuming, all things to all people, so that you couldn't take me out of your life because I offered so much to you. You needed me around. Manipulation. I didn't understand these things. I didn't understand that when I was helping, healing, helping, offering support, offering advice without being asked for it, offering lifts, money, whatever else. I didn't realize at the time I was doing it for me. I wasn't doing it without a motive. I wasn't doing it without an agenda. I was doing it so that people wouldn't leave me. So, that all of these things came to me in treatment and in the years after that. And it was offered to me to come to Ireland. Is a very small place. For any of you who've never been or who have been, it's a very small island. However, there were very, I've never heard of Codependents Anonymous. I didn't know there was such a thing. Actually, in my town, there was probably only AA. There wasn't even NA. So quite behind in some ways, and yet can be quite advanced in others. But where I lived, there was very little recovery. So I moved a couple of hours away for my recovery, and to start over in a place where I was anonymous because I needed that. And there was a Codependence Anonymous meeting there. And as part of my other substance abuse recovery, it was suggested to me that I attend CoDA. And when I walked in first, I knew I was home, but I was quite resistant. I was very uncomfortable with people's expression of pain, of emotion. You know, when people were talking about their feelings, I remember kind of sitting there rolling my eyes at times and being impatient and being intolerant to it and all of that. And simply because I couldn't be that. I was so stonewalled. I had just built up so much defenses that I didn't want to let anybody in, because if you come into me, the potential to hurt me was too great. So I had built up my defenses to keep people out. And then suddenly I'm in a room full of people who are also identifying with lots of the things that I was saying, but they're much more open because they'd been around a while, and they were open up to talking about their feelings. And I really found that the struggle, but I kept going back. Nobody made me. Nobody put a bullet to my head and said, you must be in here every Tuesday and every Saturday. But yet there I was every Tuesday and every Saturday. I turned up at these meetings. And I suppose I did hear about steps. It was being read out every week, but I didn't really hear of anybody doing the steps. You know, I didn't really hear if there had been sponsors in the room, or even co-sponsors or step groups. I never heard of any of that happening within that region. And I also didn't know of any other groups outside of that region. So I heard of sponsoring in my other groups. I heard of it happening elsewhere, but I never really heard it happening in that room, in both of those rooms that I went to. And I did ask a couple of times if anybody was sponsoring, and there didn't seem to be. And what seemed to happen, which was quite sad when the more time I spent around, was it seemed to be that people would get to a certain level of recovery and then leave. So there was no sign of step 12 happening. There was no sign of kind of doing that type of service to give it back. It was just like people seemed to get well and then go away, and maybe come in and out every now and then. But never, you know, it just seemed to be that there was a lot of movement through it, as opposed to people who were around 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. So it did seem quite difficult in the beginning. So my sponsor was somebody who took part in the meetings, but was also in my other fellowship. So while we sat down and we used the big book, I suppose, which has been used for many different fellowships, my focus was on the substance, and my focus was on codependency, but it wasn't through the actual blue CoDA book or the green workbook at that time. And I just feel that's important to say. And, you know, going through step 1, my powerlessness was very obvious. I suppose, like, my powerlessness, I knew it. You know, I literally had the clothes on my back and nothing else. And I had a business. I had quite successful business, actually. I had a couple of houses with this person, but I had nothing in paper. I had nothing written, but nothing in paper, nothing signed. I had allowed verbal, you know, contracts, and believing that person would never, you know, leave me without. And actually, you know, it was quite devastating what ended up happening. And I have to take full responsibility for it, because I didn't push for contracts. I didn't push for my name to be put on anything. And I believed that, you know, forever meant forever. And if I did enough for that person, they'd never get rid of me. Why would they? That relationship was shown to me to be very toxic and very abusive, but it had to be shown to me. I didn't know it. I actually just didn't know it. We were together for 11 years. And, you know, once it was shown to me, there was no denying the powerlessness. But it wasn't just in that romantic relationship. It was in friendships as well. You know, I had friendships that I was turning myself inside out for. And I drove to Belfast one time to collect somebody, you know, with very little money in the bank to be able to pay for the petrol. And I did it anyway, because I didn't want enough money into the car that I didn't have. And I did all of these things, you know, another part of my codependency. I just didn't want to say no to anybody, because they might leave me alone, and I couldn't handle it. And so I was in the rooms, and I started doing the steps in, as I said, in another fellowship with my sponsor. But the sponsor that I chose, the reason I chose her was we were sitting in, well, the reason God directed me to her was we were sitting in a CoDA meeting, and she happened to say a phrase that was, rejection is God's protection and redirection. It is like a light bulb just went off over her head or something. It was just like, oh my God, I need to have what this woman has. I need that in my life, that I would be okay to be rejected because it's God's protection. It's not me being left with nothing. And I had hope, real hope. So she brought me through the book. And then, as I said, we kept codependency as being part of my steps as well, and looking at that. And I actually couldn't look at one without looking at the other. They were so deeply linked. And then I was, turning up to CoDA meetings every week, and there was newcomers coming through the door, and I suppose my way of service was welcoming people. And I kind of made a decision at that time, that I really wanted to do the steps through CoDA. I really wanted to pass on the message, because I just wasn't seeing it happening, and I felt it was really important for the growth of the fellowship and for my own personal growth, because my sponsor had said to me, it wasn't a case of you might do step 12. It was, you must, you absolutely must, and you need it. As much as you need to pass it on, you need it for yourself. It will deepen your spiritual awakening. And even when we came to step 12, I had been in rooms for maybe a year at that stage, looking at the step 12 on the board, and it was being read out each and every time. And it's only when we actually came to step 12 that I heard the words, as a result of these steps, as the result of doing these steps, you will have a spiritual awakening. Up to that point, I was just like, might happen, might not. But, I hadn't even, it wasn't even in my brain as much when I came to doing it myself. So as a sponsor, sitting with somebody else, listening to their spiritual awakenings happening, watching theirs, mine has strengthened as time has gone on as well. But I guess I had to come to some kind of belief in something outside of myself. And, it was really important that step 2, I just kind of went, I looked at it first and I went, I know I'm insane. I know that. But how can I trust something that I can't see, I can't feel, I don't really know if it's there? And I suppose that's why I read out that piece earlier on about the wind, because I had been so hurt in relationships before, and this is what I was told was going to be the most important relationship, and I just didn't know if I could trust it. I really didn't know if I could trust it. But I also knew if I didn't do something different, if I didn't at least try and build some kind of a belief in something, whatever it be, whether it be nature, the group of people around me, whatever it was, if I didn't have something, I definitely had nothing to anchor onto. And then what was the point? And I didn't want to feel like that again. I had been given a chance, and I really did feel that, actually. So I know I had a higher power in my life working for me long before I knew it, obviously, and long before I admitted it. And I started to build up that relationship. And I just remember sitting in a CoDA meeting, and I'm not sure if it was on step 3 maybe. And it's like, again, that spiritual awakening was just happening within me all of the time. And then just something, it was really, really physical. It's like, I can't say something touched me, but it almost felt that way. It almost felt in that moment, all of this love that I was seeking outside of myself, in other people, externally, in jobs, in money, in relationships, whatever it was in. Suddenly, it was like somebody had just hugged me. And I could feel it. And I just started crying in that room that I had been so allergic to, that I didn't, that all of these people and their bloody emotions. And then suddenly I was sitting there flooded with my own. It was the most beautiful experience, and the most exposing. And my God, was I terrified, because suddenly I was letting people see it. I wasn't this kind of well held together person anymore. I was this woman sitting on a chair. And it felt like I was having a breakdown. In fact, I was having a breakthrough, and it was absolutely beautiful, but really uncomfortable. So that was probably the start, and it was definitely in step 3. And I found step 3 very difficult, handing over, here I was after coming up with all of these methods to have control, and then suddenly I was told, you have no control, hand it over. You don't need to know the outcome. You'll be okay. Trust, you'll be fine. And I was sitting there looking, going, but how will I be fine? How will I know what's going to happen? And what if this, and what if that, and what if this, and what if that? And my sponsor just said to me, for today, have you eaten? Have you a roof over your head? Have you enough money? Have you been to a meeting? Have you connected to people? You're okay. And that went on for a very long time. That's as much as I could do. You know, that's as much as I needed, and it's as much as I could do. And then suddenly things just started happening for me, that spiritual awakening. More and more of it started to deepen, and I started to look at step 4. And I suppose looking at, you know, the character traits and both the defects and the assets, and balancing them out, and sharing them with somebody. And again, the trust process and that with my own sponsor, and how that really was important to me, that I trust her and she trusts me. And I realize that I've after been talking for a very long time, so I want to speed it up. But that 4, 5, and 6 and 7 were really, I suppose, the strengthening steps for me, where I really started to trust, and I really started to hand over, and I really started to see the change. And then, you know, doing my amends with myself, with other people, that all, again, the spiritual awakening was in every part of it. I could see God the whole way through. It's really important about that spiritual awakening piece. It just kept on happening. And then I got to step 12. And then funnily, when I got to step 12, I had done this, you know, and I had done it with a co-sponsor in CoDA as well at the same time, because I wanted to do the book in CoDA. And so I did it with somebody unofficially, as well as my own sponsor. We went through the book together. But when I got to step 12, somebody came to me and asked me to sponsor them. And I said, no, I can't do it. Can't do it. No way. I don't have enough experience. I can't take you on. How could I do this? How could I pass on this message? Haven't a clue what I'm doing. And my own sponsor just said, you know, Phil, you're not writing the program. All you're doing is passing it on. All you're doing is sitting with somebody and reading the book and just being a witness. It's all you're doing. It's all I did with you. It's all you're doing. You don't have to have the answers. You don't have to do anything. You share your own experience, strength, and hope. Nobody else's. And that person will get what they need from that, or they won't, and they'll move on to somebody else, and that will be okay too. You do it because God has asked you to do it. And the feeling of overwhelm, you know, that this person was putting this trust in me, their faith in me, they were going to sit with me and share all of this privileged information. And I felt so honored, but I also felt absolutely petrified. So I'd said no. And I said, okay, if they come back, I'll do it. And they did. And I'm so grateful for that person. I'm so grateful. And what has ended up happening as a result of that person has gone on to sponsor other people I have taken on, other people. So in our meeting now, there's a very healthy sponsoring program happening, whether it be co-sponsoring, step group work, whatever it is, but the message is being passed on and people are staying around. And I know I'm talking very fast now because we're coming to the end, but it's as a result of Zoom actually that happened. The Irish CoDA movement onto Zoom has been so positive for us. We went to a convention that would have had possibly 30 members at it, to having an online Zoom convention that had 300 from all over the world. We connected wonderfully as a group. There are actually 14 meetings a week in Ireland alone. This is not something I knew about until that all came together. And as a result of it, they've gotten busier and busier and busier. And because of that, there's sponsoring happening throughout. So I'm living in Cork, but I'm sponsoring somebody in Galway. It doesn't matter. And this, I say that. What's the point in saying that to people who have never been to Ireland? It just means it's hours and hours away. We're not in the same physicality. So Zoom has been really good for the fellowship. Now, some of us have gone back to face, but I think the one thing that I take from this is that step 12 in sponsoring alone. I know there's loads of other ways of doing step 12, but it has actually just strengthened our fellowship, and it's kind of going from strength to strength, which is wonderful. And that's why Rona asked me, this evening to come over and to talk about step 12 and to talk about that CoDA, which I haven't done. But anyway, maybe another time, who knows? Or maybe if we have another one, you guys come along. So I'm going to shut up because I know poor Anne is saying, please, Phil, it's time. And I said I wouldn't have enough to say, as if. But look, it's been really, really lovely. I hope I made sense somewhere. And I hope I haven't frightened anyone who's on step 1. Keep going, keep coming back. It does work. And I will pass you back to Mauricio. Thank you. Best of luck.
Great. Thank you so much, Phil. That was truly amazing. I was taking notes on all of that. It's like, what questions can I start asking Phil? But then it's like, you're answering it like on the spot. Like, this is really well thought out and so forth. So I really, really appreciate you. So we'll move on to shares.
I'm a codependent. Thank you, Maurice. Well, thank you, Phil, for your wonderful share. I don't always relate to stories, but I certainly related to yours. So thank you. That was really nice to hear, even though you're all the way in Ireland and I'm in Washington State in the United States. But I was born in Belgium. I don't know, that doesn't make any difference, but anyways. So I really also appreciated the fact that you broke down the 12 step into 3 parts, because so often it's only presented as one part, the part of carrying the message, and it's glossed over the fact that you do have a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. And that to me is very comforting, and that's a very powerful promise. You do these 11 things every day, and you will get a spiritual awakening no matter what. And that's certainly been my experience. Now, I'm going to say something controversial because I have 25 years, but I do not believe in God. However, I am very clear that this is a spiritual program, not a material program, and that I have to do certain things every day. I can't take days off. I can't take vacations. It's odd. It's all the time. And I also came to CoDA through another program. And 25 years ago, CoDA did not have a big book. The only big book that was available was the AA big book. And so that's kind of where I will learn some stuff. But anyways, that's just a little bit of history. So I really appreciated your chair. Thank you for leading us, and thank you for speaking up. Like I said, I don't always relate to stories, but I certainly related to yours. So thank you very much. It's very reassuring.
Thank you so much. I will next go on to.
Good evening, Mauricio. Good evening, everybody that's making this meeting possible. It's so lovely to be here. Sorry, I was a little bit late. I got so much from your share, Phil. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a million. Yeah, for me, it's impatience often, and it's just exactly what I needed to hear. I've just done step 6, and my expectations were a little bit high. I've been feeling low because the dark really impacts me. But the acceptance is that where I am now is exactly where I need to be. And although it can be hard, we have to keep pushing through and the feelings and the emotions, because it's very easy for me to actually think, oh my God, I'm in recovery now and it's still feeling crazy. That's what I have to keep remembering. I just have to keep one moment at a time. I'm nowhere where I shouldn't be. The God of my understanding is here, absolutely here the whole time. It's just my codependence is deeply ancestral. There's no doubt about it. And thanks. I'm really looking forward to this. I mean, I lived in Ireland, and my family are from originally my ancestry, which I'm really proud of. So thank God for all of it. And I've been at the right time, at the right place. Thanks a million. God bless everyone.
Great. Thank you, Irene. I see your hand raised. Did you want to go again?
No, this is, I'm a codependent. Great meeting. Thank you very much, Phil, for your share. It reminded me so much of the early days, the pre-CoDA book days. My first CoDA meeting was November 1st, 1990. And I've been through the steps a few times and the sponsor thing and sponsoring and all of that. And I remember all the frightening things and not feeling up to the challenge and all of that. The beautiful thing about the steps, having had that spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, was that I got the joy of meeting myself, who I was on life's terms, despite my fears, despite all my reservations. You know, I got to learn to say no before I could say yes. I got to learn through steps 4, 5, 6, and 7 who the person was underneath the anger, the fear, the manipulation, the pride, the vanity, all of that. And the steps introduced me to myself. And I learned one of the biggest gifts is I couldn't have a relationship with other people or a higher power unless I had that honest, decent relationship with myself first. And that was definitely a gift of the steps. It came gradually. Thank goodness it didn't come all at one time, because I wouldn't have been able to handle it. But all the stuff you talked about, wow, it brought me right back there. And going through those steps, I live in an area where, CoDA sponsors aren't all that plentiful. And I and my other half have sponsored a few people up here, or down here in your case. So it's been quite the journey. I have much to learn. I like to be green and growing. I like to be vigilant so I don't get stale or stagnant in my spiritual growth and recovery. And yes, I do practice these principles in all my affairs as often as possible, in and out of the fellowship, and as often as I can. I don't always walk the walk as best as I can. Talk the talk, that's one thing, but walking the walk can be a challenge at times. But I'm ever so grateful for recovery and all that it has taught me. Thank you again for what you share. Welcome, newcomers. It's good to be a newcomer. It's good to see this meeting. And thanks for letting me share.
Thanks.
Thank you. We'll next go to.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for service. This is in recovery. I just really appreciated hearing the share, Phil. I loved the fact that you shared how you felt at the beginning, those stages. And I just love the humility in your share and the experience, the strength and the hope. So thank you so much. The part that really stood out for me today was how painful breakthroughs are. And just recently, in the recent days, I needed to ask for some support. And I absolutely do not like asking, not only not asking for support, but showing I have any needs, and I needed support from an external person. And I didn't get it the first time around exactly as I needed it. And that was fine. They'd said I could go back to them, and I did. And I didn't get it the second time they came back to me either. And I absolutely, at that point, did not want to go back to them again. And I just wanted to leave, throw it all up in the air and cut and run. But I felt the feelings, and I, which was again something I heard in your share, just how difficult it is to, the feelings, being with those feelings. And I experienced that, and I asked them again. I went through that. I asked them not in a controlling way, even though in my body there was a desire to control. And I expected rejection, but that didn't happen. And I got an outcome that I didn't expect, a positive one. And right now I am sitting with just all of those feelings now coming through my body of how difficult that entire process was for me to do. But it's the only way I can learn. And yeah, having breakthroughs is, I want to swear, is just hard, but necessary. And I'm just really grateful. It's just really grateful to hear loads of your share. But yeah, that really stood out for me. And thank you. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
Thank you so much. I didn't know it was 8 o'clock in the evening all the way over there. Here in Hawaii, it's 10 o'clock in the morning, or I don't know, maybe almost 11 now. But thank you so much. And it's amazing how we're spread out all over the world. And thank you so much for your share. That was so amazing. And what really, some of the things you said were great, and I had to write them down also. I love the way you describe your awareness of higher power, you know, not being able to see the wind, but being able to see what it did to the trees. And that's truly been my experience too in these rooms. I also came into CoDA from, you know, from the beverage department, as I heard it recently described, which I find so funny. Anyway, I also just related so much to many things that you said, including, and this isn't exactly the way you said it, but you were talking about the feeling of abandonment, the fear of abandonment, and the desperate feeling of that you couldn't survive. And I definitely experienced that, and that drove my relationships. And thank you so much for your clarity about, you know, all this giving and it wasn't really, you know, it was because of the fear of abandonment. And then after a relationship ending, feeling that abandonment, I remember describing it once to someone as, you know, when a relationship ended, that I would feel like a baby that had been left out in the desert, you know, like it just with nothing, like, and I realized now that it, you know, really so much of it was my own abandonment of myself. And anyway, this program is so amazing, and it just feels such a huge blessing from being able to connect with all of you and grow from your wisdom and strength and hope. And I also loved what you said about sponsorship, and I think that's really important, the idea of being a witness to this amazing spiritual program, the miracles that happen in our lives. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Phil, I think we've reached towards the closing part of your section. I'll leave maybe one question for you. If you could time travel into the future and meet yourself at 90 years old, what question would you ask yourself?
Did you have any fun?
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Claire, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Claire. I'm a recovering codependent. It's really lovely to be here. It's an honor to be given a slot to come and speak tonight. Well, it's just after 9 in Ireland now. And thank you to everyone for doing service that makes tonight possible. When Phil and I chatted about this and the topic being around step 12, I said, oh, I can't do that. Step 12 is my worst step. But, you know, that's what's my worst step. I guess I'm good at all steps and bad at all steps. Just depends on the day, really, doesn't it? And step 12 is a step that's really close to my heart and has been really, really important for me in my recovery. I thought I'd just read. Thank you, Phil, for reading all of it, actually, because I think it's really grounding in bringing us all together on the topic tonight. But step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to other codependents and to practice these principles in all our affairs. I am 2.5, maybe a little longer years in CoDA recovery, a little longer in, I guess, my overall recovery. I was probably doing some CoDA recovery before I realized how much I needed the fellowship. And what blows my mind is every time I open this blue book and read a word, not even a sentence, I'm like, wow, I needed that word today. You know, when you look at step 12, the word awakening, and I underline, and then I come back and I'm like, oh, the word next to it means something amazing to me the next day. You know, I still feel this book was just sent to me. And I suppose my story really is one, I mean, I win gold in the Codependence Olympics. I am the world's best codependent, all of the characteristics, nearly all of them I'm proficient to excellent at. I joined CoDA when I was at my absolute rock bottom, my soul and spirit was completely broken. And I did something very, very new when I walked into that room. I stuck at it for myself and I showed up every single week. And then when, I don't want to mention the COVID word, but when COVID hit and online meetings became available to me, I was, attending 2, 3, 4 at times. I was attending daily meetings, so I'm so grateful for that. And when we speak about step 12 and carrying the message, there's something in that. We've all had really, really challenging time. But for me, what I'll take from these years is the connection and the friendships and the support I've got globally, for sure all around Ireland, but globally is just amazing. So I suppose I just thought I'd break down again the step 12 for me, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. For many years, I had no connection to myself, to a higher power, and to anything in the universe. And that's what this program has given me. There are still days where I act as if a little bit around my higher power, but what I do differently now is that's fine. And I notice 10 minutes after I act as if, I'm like, oh, what was wrong with me a minute ago? I do feel connected to my higher power now. I love the step 3 prayer that was read at the start of this meeting. I probably should count how many times I say that a day. I would not be surprised if some days I say that like 10, 15 times as standard a day. That step 3 prayer is absolutely beautiful. It means so much to me. And I actually felt quite emotional when I heard it read at the start of this meeting, because I normally don't hear it read by other people. I just say it to myself. And actually I've heard my kids starting to say, she's only 4, some of the sentences of it. And I'm like, wow, I must say that prayer way more than I realize. So I might say that again now when I finish sharing here, because it's such an important step for me. The relationship to my higher power and the spiritual awakening is really evolving for me. And I would say I'm in very early stages of that. So I absolutely love hearing other people share their experience and strength and hope around their spiritual awakening. What I know for definite for me is that I can now hand over. I have this little saying that I heard on a podcast on a day I really needed to a few years ago. God, I give to you that which I cannot carry. And for me, that's been a profound cornerstone of my recovery. And building trust and having that relationship with myself, and I see, like, my spiritual awakening, I've noticed that I think a lot more visually now, and then I'm drawn to things. Like I'll see a tree, or I'll sit here, this is the desk I work from, I'll see a cloud and I'll be like, oh. And sometimes I'm like, how weird is that? I'm from Ireland. I had a very traditional Catholic upbringing, lots and lots of shame in my community and my family, and that I carry on my shoulders. And to say now what gives me peace is seeing a cloud pass my window. I'm like, oh, I think my higher power might have just passed by. And I feel really comfortable, and I don't even feel embarrassed saying that, and I noticed that I shared with people, I think my higher power might be in the heron that lives on the river over the road. I don't even care if they think I'm weird, and that's really nice. I have some kind of confidence in that. So that was, my spiritual awakening. I suppose maybe what I need to do as I even hear myself speaking is to gain a bit more confidence in that spiritual life I have, and the connection to myself that I know I had as a child. Actually, I remember having it, but that I lost from my teens into my 20s. And the second part of step 12 is around, we try to carry this message to other codependents. And for me, this has been like, it's been just amazing. I feel emotional even talking about it. I would have started step 12 ever before I even worked the steps myself, really. I suppose I'm naturally very drawn to people and can be very energized by spending time with people. So I find it quite easy to work with newcomers. I love to speak to newcomers, share my number with them. I suppose, sadly, by the time I started to feel a bit confident in CoDA, things started to lock down. So all of these relationships were built virtually. But again, we're so privileged with all the technology we have. But a lot of reading calls, so kind of less than not so much outreach calls, really, where I would just read with someone for an hour or so. And, I suppose newcomers would have fed back that they found that helpful. But actually for me, it was amazing. And as I was at that time, I was working through my steps. So it was really, really helpful just to read the words. And like I say, every time I read a sentence in this big blue book, or, you know, I also love the green workbook. I take something new away and I'm like, oh my God, I needed that today. So, and reaching out to people, you know, the Power of Five and my sponsor would have really kind of talked to me about that in the early days of my steps, you know, reaching out to people. And I was thinking, there is no way I'm going to phone somebody on a bad day. I'm Claire. I help other people. I don't ask people to help me. And, you know, I noticed there was a week or so ago, it was 11 o'clock in the morning and I was sitting here and I was supposed to be working and I was eating this like sharing bag of chocolate that was it said sharing on the bag, but I wasn't sharing with anybody. And I thought, oh my God, look what I'm doing, you know, eating chocolate at 11 o'clock in the morning. I feel like crap. And I just put the chocolate down, picked the phone up and rang a member. And it's really cool for me just to kind of reflect on that afterwards. I never would have done that before. If I was even feeling like a tiny bit bad, I would have just locked down, wouldn't have spoken to anybody until I was feeling good enough to think that I could then help them. Really, really unhealthy behavior. So it's great to, God, sorry, I just remember this being recorded and I just got a bit self-conscious for a second. It's great to be able to catch myself in those moments and see my recovery and see my progress, because I really believe for my recovery that integrating and reflecting and journaling on progress is really important, because it's not something that comes naturally to me. I naturally berate myself and shame myself and criticize myself. So even sharing at meetings, or, you know, having the privilege of an extended share here tonight, it is really nice to talk about my hope, really, I suppose, that those kind of improvements will continue. So building up those connections has been really, really important. And yeah, like I said, on the hard days, really, really making those efforts to reach out, because now it's so much easier. And what I love is the relationships that I have in the fellowship have become safe spaces for me to practice my recovery behaviors in. So I'm naturally a people pleaser. Pleasing people and ignoring my own needs comes so naturally to me now. It's innate after all of my childhood conditioning. So it's really, really important for me to use those relationships, and sometimes to even say things like, this feels awkward. I feel really unhappy about having to set a time boundary with you, for example, or reply to your message and say, actually now doesn't suit me, or I don't feel able right now. And it can feel really clunky, but even owning that actually is an approach that I take lately. And I think that works really well, because these are safe spaces, and these are the relationships that we need, so that I can practice in my day-to-day life. The other, I suppose, the real gift for me has been sponsorship and carrying the message to other codependents. I have learned more from sponsees. And I've just started working with someone new. It's amazing. Like I love saying to newcomers and to people starting their steps, like, you bring as much to the program and to the fellowship as me or somebody who's there 50 years, you know. And I love the equality in the program, actually. That's beautiful. And for sure I would, you know, one of my shortcomings would be around superiority and really, really helping myself bring it back to, like, listen to the newcomer. There's a lot I can learn. And I can also, you know, my sponsor would say to me, like, if you listen to a newcomer, you can see how far you've come as well yourself. I kind of linked to my last point. And in sponsoring, I find that working the steps in parallel really works for me. Now, it's tough going. And when I did that the last time, I would say that I kind of hit a really rocky patch. I'm very proud that I could continue sponsoring and felt really safe. My sponsee didn't need to know how challenging I was finding it, because it wasn't that I was finding this being a sponsor challenging. It was I was actually kind of after uncovering this whole other layer and of area of healing I needed to do. And I'm really proud that I was able to get some professional help that I needed, get support from my sponsor. I had at this stage, about 6 months ago, had a great network built up of people in the fellowship, so that I felt really comfortable that I could actually very safely continue sponsoring while dealing with my own stuff. And I would say that that's something I'm going to continue as I work with other sponsees, is that I will always work the steps myself, because there's something as well when you're working with somebody, I find, to be able to not ask them to do something that I'm not going to do myself again. I think that can be very, very impactful. And I think it can really kind of bring me back to like the early days of my recovery, and just remind myself that it's about putting the hard work in every single day, is what worked for me. And I suppose the third part of carrying the message to other codependents really is doing service in meetings, which is something that's very close to my heart, because I absolutely love reading the literature. And I quite like being secretary, because for me it's very, very grounding to get to read the welcome. And I get so much from the meetings. I think sometimes when I just attend, maybe I'm not as good as listening as I am at taking it in when I'm reading it. And I think Phil kind of mentioned this in her share as well, around like, it's not our program, and that was my favorite thing when I showed up. I didn't need to do anything to fix CoDA. I absolutely, in my early days, had loads of ideas how I could make CoDA better. I've shared before in other meetings, like when I was first secretary, I thought I would like redo the meeting. I would just rewrite some of it. I would, have my whole idea. I was going to have a buffet for people so that when they arrived after work, and it was going to be this like over the top, people pleasing, really, like when I reflect on it now, like very toxic. So what I love about CoDA is the structures and the boundaries and the safety. It's all about the group conscious decision. And I can focus on me, I statements, how can I keep my recovery? What do I need to do for me today? And by doing that, then really being able to be present for other people in a very, very safe way. The third part of step 12 was around practice these principles in all our affairs. The final phase in the step reminded us that we could not separate our spirituality from the rest of our lives. So for me, it's been a bit of a journey to get my head around how to integrate the step work into my day-to-day life. I feel comfortable now with where I am with that, but I would really like to progress that further. So I notice now that I wake up in the mornings, I'm saying the CoDA prayers, I'm grounding, I'm saying the serenity prayer. Like I said earlier, I think I'm, some of these prayers I'm saying way more times a day than I realize, and I obviously really, really need that. And, my behaviors, my words, my approaches, showing up at the meetings and listening. And I suppose for me, that's sometimes the downside to some of the Zoom meetings. But in my early recovery, sitting in a room and having a circle of people sitting and listening, like that saved my life. It was profound. I'd never had people actually listen to me before. I'd never listened to myself really before. And then for me to learn the discipline of sitting for other people, and I just love doing that now. I absolutely love sitting on a meeting, camera on, listening to somebody. When a member will phone, I love being able to listen because it was given to me and I know the positive impact it had. I also absolutely love when newcomers come in and they feel uncomfortable. I'm like, it's okay. I remember I did too, and creating that connection is really, really nice. And it's less about what I say. And, when we think on the traditions linked to this, I don't need to be going on the radio broadcasting about CoDA. And actually that would be something when I joined CoDA first. I was like, I need to tell everyone I read this. Everyone needs to join CoDA. And I think that's quite a common reaction. Now I have had people ask me, like, what are you doing? Is it just therapy? What group are you in? And clearly that my behaviors and my approaches and my demeanor have changed. I'm a much calmer person. I'm a much more grounded person. And even as I'm saying that now, I'm like, it doesn't even matter if anybody said or not to me, but I know, like, internally, I feel so much calmer. I feel so much safer. So practicing these principles in all our affairs, what I notice as well is when I don't practice my recovery, I very, very quickly notice it now. So if I have an engagement or an interaction with someone where I haven't showed up as Claire working the program, before it might be a few days, and then I would feel immense shame and berate myself around it. Now I'm like, oh, didn't really kind of display recovery behaviors there. I didn't really embrace the steps. I didn't really, be the person that I want to be. And I'm like, that's okay. Like, what can I do differently next time? Do I need to make an amends? That really, that makes me laugh, and it still frustrates me. You can see I'm getting frustrated now. I now have to make amends like immediately, even if I don't want to. It's like my inner truth is like, and I noticed that I need to immediately make amends. Even if I'm like, recovered Claire, that little voice in the back is like, yeah, well, you said, she said, I'm only 10% wrong. It's like, no, I need to make amends. And that's beautiful. That's a gift really, that I find it feels effortless now. Effortless. I can't say that word. It's getting late here. Now I just show up and work the program sometimes kind of on autopilot a little bit. And what I would say around step 12 really for me is, when I started, if there's anyone on the call who hasn't done steps yet or who was in early steps, I thought I would never get to step 12. When I started step 1, I was like, I know this, I'll get to step 12 easily. And I enjoyed steps 1, 2, and 3. I did. When I got to step 4, I thought I was going to actually die. I literally wondered, like, how many, there must be a record of how many people have combusted during step 4. I had never felt such pain, physical pain. They were all feelings I'd never processed, I'd never felt, I repressed. I used to ring people in the fellowship and being like, did you think you were going to die? Did you actually feel you were going to die? And I didn't come across anyone who had said, oh yeah, remember X had died from doing the steps. So I kept showing up. And once I got past step 4, things definitely looked up for me. And I kind of felt like I muddled my way through, and I really felt I didn't do them perfectly. And that's what didn't click with me when I was doing the steps the first time is, like, show up, work your ass off on this, but you will keep doing this again. I wish that I could, if I was to go back and say something to Claire doing the steps then, I would have been like, you're doing great. It's fine. You're going to do this again and again. I probably would have. That might have finished me off, actually. So maybe it's better I didn't know that. But now I know I'm able to show up, and, I'll lean on my sponsor. It's lovely now that I can, as I start working with more sponsees, and they finish the steps, then we can kind of really, we're equals the whole way through, but once they're finished their steps, then they become people that I can lean on a little bit too, and that we can kind of co-sponsor through different steps and different stages, which is a gift really, And by the time I got to step 12, I thought, shit, I haven't had a spiritual awakening. I haven't had it. And something that I like to do is journal around, even before CoDA, how everything in my life actually lined up perfectly. And when I look at little scenarios and case studies from my life, I'm like, if that had happened in a different order, it would have been a disaster. If that had happened in the way I wanted it to, it would have been an even bigger disaster. So I really like that journaling exercise. Works really, really well for me. And then I realized, actually, I think I have had a spiritual awakening. And what I didn't really realize was that it would be like continual, and I suppose evolving is the word really to use, that my spiritual awakening is evolving. And I do now have some very profound moments where I feel really connected to the universe and really, really connected to myself, very safe in myself. Before I was such a defensive. I find that I don't need to defend myself. I don't need to explain myself as much. I'm a lot more settled in myself. And for me, I think that is the spiritual awakening, that I'm just feeling comfortable that I am human. That was new news to me. I have a list of things that were new news to me when I joined CoDA that kind of blew my mind around. This was all credited to my sponsor. You're human. I don't think I realized that. I think I thought I was superhuman. You were entitled to make mistakes. Other people are entitled to make mistakes. You were entitled to be wrong. You were entitled to change your mind. I think I was like 3 months before I was like, no, really? 3 months of like getting my head around that. You're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to make a mistake. I never knew I was allowed to make a mistake. I still struggle with that. Spilled a massive cup of tea Last night, my husband put loads of milk in his tea and I spilled it all over the carpet. It was absolutely disgusting. And I was like, it was an accident. I was fixing Christmas decorations. It was an accident. These things happen. Just dry it up, clean it. But I mean, if that was 3 years ago, I may have imploded because I made such a big mistake. So yeah, so much change, so much to be grateful for, one day at a time, and just work the steps every day, really, and keep working them in parallel with sponsors, which is our sponsees, which is my step 12, really. I think I might leave it there. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was fantastic. I appreciate that. We'll open up the room now for individual sharing. If you would like to share or have a comment for Claire, and I can go first. So I wanted to say that I related to Claire, your comment around listening and the discipline of sitting for other people. Before coming to CoDA, for me personally, like, I would be that person in the room that would interrupt people all the time in conversations, especially in the workplace or with my kids or with other people in my life. It's just constantly interrupting. I was just so unaware of it, but really coming to meetings for me personally and having to sit and listen and be present made me so much more aware of, for me, as far as not having this urge to like insert myself into a conversation or interrupt or just listen basically to what other people have to say and just be present in the moment. And then it made me much more aware too when I have something to say and when I speak outside these meetings if other people are interrupting me, is like it makes me much more aware of that as well. So having that patience and sitting and listening skills is something that's really kind of helped me quite a bit as far as coming to these meetings, is really kind of developing that ability to just sit and listen as opposed to sit and interrupt and not really have allowed the other person to speak or say what they want to say. So I can relate to what you were saying about that. That's a really great comment that you brought up. Thank you. We'll go next to
My name's Simon Codependent. Thank you, Claire. I hope I'm not using up too much time because I know there's quite a few people in this meeting, and I did speak with something on the last speaker. But I really liked what you had to say, and I remember the spiritual journey for me. Funny thing about spiritual awakenings is that other people have a tendency to see it before we do because, well, in my case, I had a hard time believing that good things could happen for me, and to embrace that and to receive that, because I was the type of codependent that if someone cared about me, whether it was a higher power or another human being, I wanted to dictate the terms of that. I wanted to control how much could come in and just what I could get. And I got a surprise one time when someone after a meeting came up to me and said, "Who are you to determine how much another person can care about you? How much another person can love you, how much a higher power can care?" And it just blew me away because I really had no response. And I didn't realize that I was so busy doing and distracting and running that I wasn't really being. I was wearing so many hats and taking on so many roles as a chameleon that being present was a very difficult thing. The litmus test of this is, could I be in a room by myself and it was silent and be okay with what was going through my head? Or could I be in a room with other people and be present, use both ears to hear without, thinking what I'm going to say next? And those were difficult challenges, which sponsees also taught me to do. And I am so grateful for the things that sponsees have taught me. I'm so grateful for the tools and the options I learned. Three things that were very, very important for my recovery was, first of all, is awareness that there were things that I had to change: habits, thinking, outlook, attitude, all kinds of things. The second thing was acceptance, and acceptance meant that I didn't necessarily have to like it. I just had to accept it as life on life's terms and embrace that and work through that anyway. People are going to be who they are. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to fail. It doesn't make me a mistake or a failure. It just means that I'm learning. I have to learn the things I didn't learn in another context. So that meant other people would have to be my teachers, and I'd have to put that hat on occasionally. And the third thing is I'd have to take action on that change, because if nothing changes, nothing changes. Wherever you go, there you are. And if you like what you're getting, keep doing what you're doing. Well, CoDA taught me I could change what I was doing and I would get different results. And I'm grateful for a higher power for that. I'm grateful for this program. And I'm grateful for the fellowship, because it has taught me many things, many things. And the fear you described when the emotions came up, I remember that. I remember thinking that I might die from it. And then I had to keep telling myself, well, I didn't die the first time I experienced these things. And when they came up again and I stopped running from them, distracting myself from those feelings and just sitting with them, I realized that it was okay to have the feelings. It's okay to express them and to just be with them and allow them, and not to push them away, but let them go through me. And I found that things that I used to resent and that would keep me boiling for weeks, gradually, as the time went down, it became less and less time reacting, less and less time being ruled by those emotions. And as the heavier ones lifted, and I went through steps 6 and 7, I got to see the underlying emotions underneath that had been kind of whitewashed over from the big ones, the grief, the loss, the anger, the rage. And to see them come up and to experience them and feel them and to process them. So I am grateful for the tools of this program. I'm grateful for spiritual awakenings and sponsoring and service and all of that. And I cannot put a price on what I've learned in recovery, because it gave me one of the greatest gifts I never had before. It gave me the gift of me, which means I can give this gift to you. I can give this gift to others. And that's, to me, that's so very important, especially this time of year. So thank you for letting me share.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you for your share, Claire. I appreciated that. And what I really liked, something that stood out, was when you shared that you weren't sure, you hadn't had a spiritual awakening, and then you realized that kind of you had, and it was more about how you were feeling in yourself. And that really resonates for me. I really struggled with that idea for a long time. And for me, one of my kind of fail-safe ways of feeling like I have got a connection to a higher power is that when I'm grounded and relaxed in my body and centered, that for me means I am connected to something that's greater than myself. And it doesn't matter that I don't know exactly what that is. And sometimes it can be God, sometimes it can just be the universe, it can be nature. It doesn't matter so much. And although part of me would really love to have a really strong relationship with maybe sometimes God, or whatever, what's been really helpful is that I just know that as long as I'm grounded and centered, automatically I am tapping into the wisdom that's kind of much greater than me, and it's not me coming from me, it's coming from outside of me. And it was really just nice to hear the way you put it, which was slightly different to the way I felt it, but I thought actually that really resonates. And I just I don't hear that quite often, so yeah, I appreciated hearing that. And it's just been a really valuable thing for me as someone who's struggled and had an inconsistent connection to a higher power. And I still do, it comes and goes, but for me that is my that's my go-to. And yeah, thank you so much. So I'm going to leave it there.
Great, thank you. We'll go next to.
Thank you. Here, recovering from codependency. Claire, thank you for your share, and thanks for everyone doing service on this meeting. I was resonating with a lot. Definitely learning how to ask for and receive help has changed my life, and it's still changing my life each day as I pick up those tools, pick up the phone, get to meetings, share, take part in sponsorship. And then more recently, giving service in the form of listening and sponsoring others and just having people outreach to me more. I think this season has been the most outreach in my direction I've received, just a part of the program, the passing it forward, what I've been given as well. And I've had to learn how to set boundaries and find balance in that, because when people first started calling me for outreach, I would just say yes always, and that, that had some advantage to it just because it was saying yes to my program as well. But in more recent times, I've had to learn how to balance self-care and have good time boundaries. And I'm on a journey with that. So I wanted to open up a question to you of how do you balance self-care and receiving phone calls and working with sponsees or co-sponsors? What does that balance look like for you? And how do you know if you're in balance or not?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah. If you're willing.
Yeah, of course. Sorry. It's a really good question. I suppose that comes back to what I say about working with sponsees is an opportunity for me to practice my recovery. So people pleasing on Claire before recovery wouldn't have been able to handle this at all. I would have burnt out really quickly. So what I say to myself now is, I could talk about this for about an hour, is the truth, because I've reflected on this, journaled on this, sought a lot of advice from members who are around a lot longer. So I'll try and summarize. My thing is tune into myself and notice what feels right and what doesn't. And I think at the heart of it is, if I'm not well, then I can't support and guide other people. So I will be a terrible sponsor if I am tired or resentful or can't give my full attention. And so, somebody recently asked me to sponsor them, and I really sadly had to say no, and I would have loved to, but I had to trust this wasn't the right time, because it just didn't feel the right time, because I already had other commitments. I started a new job a while back, and I was sponsoring someone. So we kind of had to rejig what the boundaries would look like. Because for the first few months of working with them, for the first few months of sponsoring them, I actually wasn't working a job. So I had a lot of flexibility. And then I had said, okay, we need to have a conversation so that I can give to you what I had said I would give, which would be your sponsor and fully show up for you. But also, this is happening in my personal life, and I now need to commit to this job too. And you know what? By having the conversation up front and being really honest and saying, let's just give each other continuous feedback, it works seamlessly, actually. And there was not one problem. But I think a problem would have happened if I hadn't spoke up and said, let's address this and talk through it. Does that answer your question? Tuning into myself, being honest, setting boundaries, and accepting that sometimes it's really, really uncomfortable for me to say no. It's really, really uncomfortable, and that's okay. And a thing that I do, I think I mentioned this, my little trick is to actually say it. I hate saying this to you. It's really, really hard for me to say no, or not now, or later, or yes, but under this time boundary. And I think people are really receptive to that, especially if they're in recovery. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks so much. It's a great question.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful. And that's a comprehensive answer. I'm resonating with that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And we'll end with.
Hi, Mauricio. Claire, thanks. Recovering codependent. I'm in California today. We're traveling. It's a beautiful day. Happy to be on this meeting. Hello to my friends here. It's amazing. I have some real life friends on this meeting. I've just tuned in recently, but I'm hearing people talk about sponsorship. I thought I'd share about how I got my first sponsor. I was asking around, how do I get a sponsor? And I heard a lot of different ideas, but the idea I liked the best was an old English doctor told me, I'd recommend interviewing several potential candidates and make that several calls to them and meet with them and ask them lots of questions about their recovery and how they practice in sponsorship and higher power and everything. And then they'll disqualify themselves one by one. And as you get to know them, you'll know which one you want to be your sponsor. So I did that. And he was the last guy. I asked him to be my sponsor, the old English doctor. And he was a great sponsor. He didn't give me advice. He listened more than he talked. He asked lots of questions that got me thinking and exploring. He subcontracted me to other members and always encouraged me to make daily outreach phone calls to other members that I'd meet at meetings, and was interested to have more talks. He taught me that meetings was simply a place where we'd meet one another, and it was like an appetizer or a sampler, a few minutes of this person, a few minutes of that person, so I could decide who I wanted to talk more with, and that the real work of recovery happens outside of meetings, in between meetings, in outreach phone calls, and working steps together and so forth. And he taught me that there's the study and learning of how to practice the steps is the first phase of working the steps, and the second phase is to actually practice applying the steps in my day-to-day life, and the third phase is to integrate the steps more deeply by passing them on to others, being a sponsor myself. So I've had the joy of all of this going on for quite a while, and it's been well worth it for me, and I highly recommend it. Thanks again for being here. I'm going to lower my hand now and listen again. Appreciate you guys.
Great, thank you. Okay, I just want to give a warm thank you to our presenters, Phil and Claire, today. Thank you so much for being here, being vulnerable with us, and sharing your own personal experience, strength, and hope with us. As always, I am entirely grateful for people like you. For our closing prayer, I'll read this out for us. We thank our higher power for all that we have received from this meeting. As we close, may we take with us the wisdom, love, acceptance, and hope of recovery. And I also love to close my items with an affirmation. And the affirmation I have today is, no matter what you do, no matter what you've done, I won't stop loving you. Thank you for being here.